special thanks to Jaime for joining us today. We're going to speak with Jaime, learn a little bit about her entrepreneur path, and hopefully leave a little bit of time for Q&A. Jaime, for your kind of background, context, and edification here, the Zip Launchpad at San Diego State, I'm not sure how familiar you are, but is just chock full of super passionate, incredibly ambitious, very skilled and experienced young entrepreneurs working on a whole host of different startup projects. So students, faculty, and staff from San Diego State University are able to work through a 3-phase program, E-Track, L1, and L2, that allows for them to systematically and kind of step-by-step work through the startup challenges that I'm sure you're very experienced with and struggled with. Myself, I'm an SDSU alum. Way back when there was no Zip, I started businesses without any hand-holding or relationship or support that I think really our Zip participants are really benefiting greatly from. I'm going to read a quick bio for Jaime. Jaime Schmidt is an entrepreneur and founder of Schmidt's Naturals, which she started in her kitchen in Portland, Oregon in 2010. Jaime is known for modernizing natural personal care products and bringing them into the mainstream market. Under her leadership, Schmidt's grew into a household name, lining the shelves of retailers including Target, Costco, Whole Foods, Walmart, and CVS across 30 countries. In 2017, Schmidt's partnered with CPG giant Unilever, with Jaime continuing as the brand's founder and spokesperson. Jaime is the co-founder of Color Capital, an investment fund that specializes in the consumer products industry, retail and e-commerce, brand positioning, and M&A. She's the author of Supermarket, Crafting Business on Your Own Terms, a personalized guide on how to put your business on the map, turning your passion into profit. Jaime will serve as a mentor on Going Public, a new original series debuting on Entrepreneur Media that allows viewers to invest in IPOs, airing in January 2022. She recently launched Crypto Packaged Goods, a community and NFT project bridging the consumer packaged goods industry with emerging opportunities in Web 3.0, and is co-founding a brand launching soon to welcome more women into the crypto space. Jaime is regularly profiled in prominent press, including Inc., Entrepreneur, Business Insider, and Quartz. Jaime is an inaugural member of the Inc. Founders Project and has also been recognized as 100 Most Intriguing Entrepreneurs from Goldman Sachs, PNW Entrepreneur of the Year, and more. Jaime is a regular contributor to Fast Company and Entrepreneur. All that being said, I'm sure we could go on and on and on with the impressive and interesting accomplishments and accolades from Jaime, but I figure I will just introduce her and let her speak a little bit about the path that you have taken. So without further ado, Jaime, thank you for joining us. Everyone, thank you for joining. How are you doing?
Good, thanks, Jonathan. That was a long bio. I appreciate you going through all of that. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. I'm going to do, if you're open to it, a little bit of fireside chat style.
Yeah, that sounds fun.
Throw a few questions your way, and anyone, if you have questions along the way, I'd love for this to be an interactive conversation. So please throw them in the chat, and I will ask them as well. But maybe why don't you just start off by telling us a little bit about yourself. Personally, where do you come from? How did you get into this work? What's your ambition? And what drew you to being a founder and startup entrepreneur?
Yeah, I'd love to. Thanks for having me. I'd say that all of you who are here are probably steps ahead of where I was when I was back in college. I went to Michigan State University for my undergrad. I was a confused student who didn't really know what she wanted to do with her life. I did choose business because it seemed practical and it seemed opportunistic, but I didn't really know what that meant or what that might look like for me. When I graduated way back in 2000, I ended up starting my career at a staffing company. So I was recruiting other people for work, but still sort of lost and wondering, what can I do? Like, what does this world hold for me? So I started, I worked my way up the HR ladder through that job, but simultaneously started sort of exploring this creative side of myself. And I thought, I'm not much of an artist, I'm not much of a maker, but I want to create something and I want to put some beautiful art out into the world. And so at this point I had moved to Portland, Oregon, and that's the most creative city in the country. And everybody there is some sort of artist or musician. And I wanted to fit in too, right? So I started, I actually got pregnant pretty early, unexpectedly in a relationship. And it was an opportunity for me to start, paying closer attention to the products I was using on my skin. And I started making my own shampoos, soaps, lotions, and sunscreens and deodorant, mostly because I wanted something, that didn't have potentially harmful chemicals, but I also thought it was just a cool way to create something. And then I saw opportunity still while pregnant to take this sort of further and explore the community's interests and start selling at farmers markets and street festivals. And next thing you know, I'm a new mom. I have people in love with my products and some wholesale opportunities in front of me. And so I decided to make it a brand, named it after myself because I didn't know what else to call it. So I called it Schmidt's. And from there, just kept growing. And so I found myself, I guess they call them accidental entrepreneurs. But it was really, it was that point in my life. I guess I was 31 years old, and it finally felt like I had found something I was passionate about. I was excited to explore it and keep going.
Right. So, I mean, if anyone here in this group is in natural products or familiar with the sector, you'll know there's just a crazy amount of competition, especially in the last 20 years. When you go to the Natural Products Expo and there's thousands and thousands of booths and startups and either well-resourced or not projects. What made Schmidt's a little bit different? How did you guys kind of rise to the top in that sector?
Yeah, when I look back on it now, it blows my mind that we were able to break through, because literally, like, as you say, like so many CPG industries are just so competitive. I think one of our advantages was we were pretty early to naturals. They weren't as trending. This was 2010 when I started the company. People were starting to pay attention, but there was still big opportunity to make waves. And the store shelves were just kind of boring and bland. And so I saw an opportunity to create something that looked a little different, right? There was just this aesthetic that felt kind of overdone. Even though naturals were new, everybody was kind of playing in the same color scheme. Some of the imagery that was used was like lavender fields and chamomile flowers and stuff. And I thought, well, how can I make this look cool, right? And so I wanted to bring something interesting to people's bathrooms. And so I thought, I'm just going to take an artistic spin on this, and I'm also going to create fragrances that just haven't been done yet and that are interesting and different. And so I think that was a big, advantage that we had, with getting our product to market. But then also just like my founder story, right? Like starting as a pregnant mom at the farmers markets and just being able to talk to my customers face to face. I think I was in a position where a lot of the competition was just, sort of seen as a factory spitting out product, but there was like a human behind my brand. And it was around that time too that founder stories started to really play into the success of a lot of different companies. And that's still very true today. And then as we grew, challenges were different. Like there were a lot of deodorant brands coming up behind me. It was a struggle to stay relevant and stay ahead of, their messaging. So we had to be really mindful of how we talked about the product. So it started with the message of finally a natural deodorant that works, because money back then did not. But then there were a lot of products coming to market that did really work. And so we, had to find a way to get ahead of that messaging. So then we started focusing on different attributes of the product, right? Different ingredients and the fragrances and sort of this lifestyle aesthetic, and really just playing around with different messages in our marketing.
Mm-hmm. Excellent, thank you. We have a question here from Adrian, who, first of all, loves the style of your place, either home or office or home office. And wondering, if you can speak a little bit about, I don't know if it's a formal acquisition or M&A, or how did that come about? What role do you play now? And how has that impacted the brand?
Yeah. Well, fast forward 7 years from the farmers market days, Schmidt's had grown really, really quickly. We had widespread distribution that started to catch the attention of the bigger brands, right? So Unilever, who acquired us, was also the parent company of some of the other more notable deodorant brands like Dove and Axe. And so they started to know that we were taking their market share. And so they either had to create a natural deodorant that competed with us or acquire us and bring us into the family. So they reached out. It was in 2017. We actually, at that time, had started to have conversations with a broker, Goldman Sachs. We were starting to realize that we needed to raise capital. So I bootstrapped the business the entire time, and we were at a point where we needed money. And so through those conversations with our broker, Goldman, we also started to see interest from companies like Unilever and P&G and L'Oreal. So it definitely came as a surprise. It wasn't something I was actively searching for or really had been thinking about, to be honest. I never, when I was growing the business, had never looked too far ahead around, an exit strategy. It was just, I loved what I was doing, and that's really all I could see for myself. But when that opportunity came up, I paid attention. I thought, well, this could be an interesting path for the business, right? We were certainly stretched very thin, capital wise, staff wise. We needed to start recruiting for some C-suite positions. We had a very lean team. And really, to be frank, just needed the support of a big company like Unilever, who had been in the business for years, who had solid supply chain and, and consumer insights that were more sophisticated than what we had. So I started to take it seriously, and then realized too, of course, the personal, benefit to me with a big acquisition like that, and what did it mean for my financial future, and then my opportunity to plug into different projects in my future, and be a source of support and, I guess, inspiration for other entrepreneurs. And so it all sort of came together, and it made sense for me. So I took it seriously and started to negotiate, and then things moved pretty quickly. And then at the time of the acquisition, there were certain non-negotiables for me, for sure, when we were going back and forth on what the future roadmap of the brand looked like, and what members of the team had to stay on, and things like that.
Mhm. And because there's this M&A conversation, which is purely financial or operational for a lot of people, but you're a value-driven founder. How did the acquisition of a large partner help support production scale, but also balance that sustainability piece and conversation that I'm sure
Yeah.
or health and wellness, or these elements that you'd obviously really conceptualized and taken to heart when starting the brand?
Yeah. Some of the non-negotiables that I mentioned were like, we were always a vegan and cruelty-free brand. And so I was not willing to entertain any conversations with a partner who would be interested in changing that. So also, Unilever has really progressive standards and ideals and like goals that they're working towards it, which the general public might not see, right? Because they're seen as this big corporation, and but they actually are doing really cool things that I felt like secure in partnering with them. I thought, our brand is actually in good hands because we're aligned on our overall, values and mission. But as it was scary at first, right? Handing off, my baby that I'd worked so hard to build. And so I stayed very, very close to the brand, and removed, I wasn't involved in operations anymore, but was still able to consult and advise and provide feedback, and just kind of keep an eye on things as we scaled.
Mm. So kind of jumping around in the conversation here from inception and idea to acquisition and what that looks like, moving back to kind of that middle phase. And in my experience, at least, there's a bit of a very organic and natural energy that exists from like that spark, the idea, the founder moment, to 5 and 10 employees. And then there's really kind of like a bit of a machine that runs itself when you're at 500 or 5,000 employees. But what my experience has been is that like 10 to 50 is one of the hardest growth periods. Like there's demand, people are starting to have expectations of the brand. You now have multiple employees whose livelihood depends on you. Like, tell us about that growth
Yeah,
moment in Schmitz.
I think like that realization that other people's livelihood was depending on me was when I realized, like, oh wow, I'm in deep now, right? Like I have, this is my life, and I want to make this as successful as possible, not just for myself and my customers, but for the people that are working with me. But you're right. Every hire is so critical, especially when you're bootstrapping, because there's no money to waste on making a bad hire. But we made them. You never know until someone's working if it's the right fit. And so I think, yeah, it's interesting too when you think about like what you look for in a hire for a startup, because it can be very different than what like a bigger, more established corporation is looking for. Like I was not scouring someone's resume, like really trying to, pick apart like certain skill sets. It was more, let's talk, and I want to hear your enthusiasm around what I'm building, and I want you to bring new ideas to me that I'm not thinking about. And so we would make hires sort of based a little bit on intuition, and just like in really exciting conversations that we were having with people.
Mm. We have a few questions from Mary Elizabeth here. She asks, when you began your business, how did you spread out your time for aspects of the business like operating, marketing, and administration?
I did all of it. I posted yesterday on Instagram something to the effect of, there's the type of founder who can strategize and visualize, but then there's the one that can just jump in and get their hands dirty. And I think like as a new founder, you have to do all of it. So one minute you might be strategizing a like multi-million-dollar partnership, and then the next you're like reconciling a spreadsheet. And so it's just like trying to prioritize, what's the most important thing to get through that day. And sometimes, it's like ideally it's something that's going to lead towards acquiring new customers and growing your revenues, but there's also a lot of other stuff happening that you have to get done. And so it's a constant back and forth and balance.
Yeah. Yeah. I like to talk to young entrepreneurs about the things you like to do versus the things you have to do,
Yeah.
and figuring out how to carve kind of that 80-20 rule time.
Right.
Um, Mary Elizabeth also asks, how do you find balance between running your business and personal life? And
Yeah.
also, is there a quote that you live by?
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's this idea of like work-life balance, right? And I think it's more like just an integration of work and your personal life that's just so key as an entrepreneur. And you are in charge of your schedule, and you have to know when you feel like you need a break, or you need to know when there's a week that you have to push really hard. And that's okay. Maybe you are working like 80 hours one week, just busting your butt, right, to get something done. That's normal. That's entrepreneurship. And as much as I want to preach, like, like obviously take breaks and take care of your mental health, but know when to push hard, right? So maybe the next week is when you're like, you know what, I'm done. I'm off with my phone this week. I'm leaning on my team to step up. And it's just knowing when to really push. And then when you have like a family or a partner, that's a whole other level of responsibility and potential stress, right? Like I was a new mom building a business and had a baby who needed so much love. And so I had all these conflicting feelings of guilt, whether it was I'm not giving enough time to my child or not giving enough time to my business. So you just have to accept that nothing's perfect, that you're trying your hardest, and just know where to cut yourself some slack.
Mm. Yeah, I'm wondering, what are the role of being a female-founded business play in the development, and maybe on that also touch on your guys' effort and commitment to, like, now what we're seeing is a really critical piece of organizations and DE&I, and how that's been kind of central to the work, obviously from the beginning, and how it's now manifested today.
When I first started the business, I didn't like think a whole lot about like, I'm a woman looking to grow a business, and what are all the challenges ahead of me? And so, but they naturally, showed up as I went. But I think every entrepreneur has challenges, right? Regardless of who we are. There's no disputing that like women generally have to work a little harder to prove their capabilities. There's certain conversations where you might not be taken seriously, but I think you just try to, not make assumptions and just believe in what you're doing and just keep pushing. And I think what most importantly is like the right partners and will emerge from your conversations, right? If something feels off or you think somebody's just not, taking you seriously, then that's not the right person for you to work with. And so whether it's suppliers or investors or whomever, there's people out there that want you to succeed regardless of how you identify with your gender, right? So, yeah. And then you asked the D&I kind of diversity and inclusion piece.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was always in my thinking. I wanted a diverse team, not just, because it was the right thing to do, but it's like, that's the way to bring the best perspectives to your business, is just to get different types of people thinking about things differently. And so always thinking about that. And I think a business would just be, it'd be a major oversight not to be thinking that way.
Yeah. Tiffany asks, did you have any issues with people trying to copy your special creation? And how did you protect your IP?
Yeah, I have a whole chapter in my book on competition and how I approached it mentally and in work. It's overwhelming, but it's also like there's a lot of advantages to having people doing what you're doing. I wrote a whole thread on Twitter, and I think I shared a slider on Instagram about this too, of like productive ways to view your competition. It's easy to be overwhelmed or assume, oh my gosh, they're copying me, or even get hung up on like things that you think you should be copying or mirroring from your others who are ahead of you. And it's the trick is, I think the most important piece is like staying focused on the vision that you have for your business, being aware of what's going on around you, but not obsessing over it. And then if you truly think somebody's like ripping you off, like, of course there's ways you can approach that and protect your IP. But also just keeping this mindset that like, hey, the more awareness we have to what we're doing, the better, right? So maybe there's another natural deodorant brand who's just killing it, right? And they're making a lot of money, but that just means more people are aware of the industry, and that they're going to want to, try other brands that are other, effective natural deodorants too.
Yeah, the rising tide lifts all boats.
Yeah.
And can we take a moment to plug your book here and tell us where you can find it?
It's called Super Maker. The idea is that, I started as a maker, and I get some people that, start with a craft and then turn it into a business. I see them as super makers. And so I just shared my story of how it all started and how we scaled and everything I learned along the way.
Fantastic. Is that something people can find online? Do you have a personal website?
It's in pretty much every major bookstore, a lot of the indies, and also Amazon. I'll put the title in here, just in the chat.
Sweet.
Just, yeah.
Yeah, and while you do so, Martise here said, I watched your My BFF Minted stream and loved it. Super informative, which is not a
Cool. Thanks.
question.
Yeah, that's my world right now. So I'm an investor and advisor consultant, but also started this new project in Web3 in NFTs. I don't know if anybody's into that space, but that's a whole other industry. But I think there's a lot of interesting potential there, especially at the intersection of business and Web3, and especially like consumer brands. So we can save that for another time. But I recently launched an initiative called BFF, and the idea is to bring more women and underrepresented people and non-binary individuals just into the space, and make them understand that there's opportunity there too. Like, it's become a bit of a masculine space, and so we want to just sort of level the playing field there.
Yeah. Eddie asks here, did you struggle at all or have any doubts about wiggling your company's way into market compared with other more established companies in the space?
Yeah, I remember having these moments where I was making deodorant like at the stove top and thinking, like, who do I think I am trying to compete with these huge brands, right? But I think it's opportunity, right? Like, there's being a young brand that's fresh has more room to sort of make mistakes and try things and play with different messaging, where the bigger brands that already have a lot of attention, they can't get away with some of that. So that's your opportunity to like really get creative and just kind of see what sticks.
Yeah, I look at it as the spectrum between the fake it till you make it and kind of the imposter syndrome,
And you're
and being somewhere in the middle, humility plus confidence.
Yeah, totally. And if you're small enough, you still like you can just get away with things, right? And there's like not a whole lot of people watching you. And it's when you start to get more attention that you like have to just kind of button things up a little bit more, right?
Yeah. Carlin here asks, what did you see as your brand's competitive advantage entering such a competitive market, and what was the most difficult obstacle you had to overcome?
Yeah, the advantage, I think, I touched on this a little bit before, was especially in the earliest days, like that focus on ingredients, fragrances, and sort of a different aesthetic in our packaging, but really always prioritizing the customer. That was so key for me. But I think the trick there too is knowing when to take their feedback seriously enough that you want to make changes, right? So I took everything so seriously. If someone said this should be done differently, I'm like, oh my gosh, I got to rush and do that. But then I realized like that's not sustainable and that doesn't make sense for your brand, really. So then you start to look for patterns in the feedback that you're getting. And if there's a lot of people saying the same thing, then you start to consider, hey, maybe this does make sense for my business.
Yeah.
What was the second part of the question?
What was the most difficult obstacle you had to overcome?
Oh gosh, lots of them. We had in-house manufacturing, which posed all sorts of challenges around raw materials and quality control and all that. Money was a big problem. Staffing was hard. On a personal level, is knowing how to lead a team, and just the book goes deep into all the challenges and everything I learned.
Yeah. Well, maybe talking a little bit about the investment piece. Can you tell us how some of the early, knowing that a lot of our program participants here are, right at the startup level, what was some of your experience in early stage investment? Was it kind of family self-funded? Was it a little bit of blend? What did you learn? Maybe some
In
lessons.
the first couple of years, I had side jobs, right? So my business was not my full-time gig. I really eased into it, which I think for me was an advantage. But again, I didn't even understand yet that the major potential in what I was doing. So having a couple part-time jobs was key, and I consider that now like the seed money for the business. And then when we started to take on D2C, we were able to recycle those profits back into the business and sustain that way. So being bootstrapped, it's just constantly recycling your profits back into the business. And then we started later, about 6 years in, took out a couple lines of credit for the bank. And then, as I mentioned, when we were right before the acquisition, we were starting to entertain those conversations with investors, but never had to pull the trigger on that.
Yeah, great. We have a question here. Was Schmidt's your first startup, or did you have any other projects that you had worked on?
Yeah, that was it. I job hopped a lot throughout my career, and I'd been on this kind of soul searching journey to find happiness in my work, but that was definitely my first business. I mean, you can go back to my childhood. I had like lemonade stands and garage sales and things like that, which were always fun.
Entrepreneur at heart.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Kind of going back, I had mentioned a little bit about the things that you like to do versus the things that you have to do.
Yeah.
Are there some kind of core competencies or skill sets that you think are fairly universal to founders, where like you may not be the CFO for the long term, once
Yeah.
you staff up, but like you should probably understand finances.
I
Like,
think,
well, how do you juggle that?
yeah, I think like you surprise yourself with what you can do if you like believe in your business, right? Like you'll find yourself in a position to just figure things out. I mean, like think about the wholesale. For me, I didn't know what any of the terms meant. People are asking for line sheets, they're asking for cogs, and just, like I don't like just nothing makes sense to me. But when you are excited about it and you believe in its potential, you just go and you figure it out.
Mm,
I think you like having a love for your business is like powers you through everything. But then you start to understand where your weaknesses are and what you enjoy more, and you start to hire people to fill in those gaps. For me, as a CPG company, I loved to be staying close to the product and was literally like making the product and new iterations of it up until the acquisition. And so, even though we had a factory where I had a whole team that was making the product every day, I still, if we had a new fragrance or a new formula, I was going back to my home kitchen making it myself, like without any distractions. And that was like where I really felt, excited the most.
yeah, and kind of to that in your founder journey as you were learning these things, or maybe the first time you heard CPG, like I don't even know what that means when someone asked you.
Mm.
Was there a resource, that a book, a YouTube series, a mentor, and
Yeah.
how did you navigate that process?
I really leaned into my community quite a bit, whether it was my neighbors at the farmers market or different trade shows I was going to, and a lot of it I just Googled too. I didn't take the time to seek out a mentor. I was so unnetworked at that time in my life that I wouldn't even know where to start. I wasn't on Twitter. I wasn't plugged into any of these entrepreneur communities. So I just wouldn't even know where to go. But I think now, if you are a new entrepreneur, it makes sense to kind of start building those networks because you never know what you're going to need as you grow. And Twitter's a great one. LinkedIn is good, but I think like Twitter's where you really start to like form relationships, know what's trending, and start and just kind of thrive within that entrepreneurial ecosystem.
Yeah, I definitely speak a lot to young founders about that leaning in moment,
Yeah.
especially in the early stages, like really show up to your community's
Yeah.
networking events, find who the angel groups are that get together, or just do the thing and introduce yourself, because it holds, I find at least that the personal connection holds so much power. If someone comes and introduces themselves to me, hey, my name's this, I like what you're doing, I'm doing this, like
Yeah.
that goes so much further than a cold email or
Right. And even if it's
yeah.
someone working in a different industry, there's still things you can learn from each other, right? A business is a business and you often have the same struggles.
Mhm. Cool. We have a question here, which was, what was the most exciting part about your business early on? Was it first sales, customers, investors, a certain amount of revenue hit?
I think like hearing the testimonials from customers that would say, the product was changing their lives was pretty emotional for me. When you first sell a product as a new founder, sometimes you feel like unworthy or you're afraid, like who do I think I am? I'm trying to charge money for this thing I made. But then when people start to tell you these really heartfelt testimonials and like just validates what you're doing.
Hmm. We have two questions here, which are kind of the same thing, which was, when was your holy crap moment that you knew this was going to be big? And then really, at what point did you realize you wanted to start expanding your business to hiring other people?
Yeah, I think the holy crap moments came kind of daily, really. Whether it was just a happy customer or a new wholesale account or maybe a press feature or a blogger wrote about it. Pretty early, I was invited on TV. So that was a pretty cool moment. Then I realized, okay, now more of the world knows about me. And then your second question, I forgot.
Oh, at what point did you realize you wanted to start expanding your business to hiring other people?
Pretty quickly. Once I was at the markets, I got a taste for happy customers. It brought me back every weekend, and I realized, I wanted to be there and I wanted to keep making people happy. And then a lot of the early wholesale accounts came through those markets too, where people would approach my booth and say, I work at this store in town. Like, can we carry your product? And so that was just, there was always incentive to just keep going.
Hmm. And wondering, like, how in your kind of the pathway of building the business have you stayed on track versus like, what's it, the compelling few versus the whatever many? Like, have you developed innovation portals for like direct consumer recurring subscription models, which may be interesting but take you off of the path? Like, how do you stay on the main track?
Yeah, I think it's important to pay attention to what's trending, but also stay focused on your overall vision for the business. I think like consumer surveys and insights are always so key. Like if we expanded our roadmap, it was always not based on what we thought would work, but based on what our customers wanted from us. I think that's really key. That a lot of brands jump in with a new product offering where just based on their own intuition or what they think is going to do well. But if you really like listening to your customers, like is everything.
Yeah, I would love to drill a little deeper into that because we talk a lot in Zip about this kind of the founder syndrome. Like my idea is the best idea. If you don't get it, then you're an idiot. It's not that I have a bad, like how do you juggle that? Like, you have a strong vision, which is what led you to entrepreneurship, but also like at the end of the day, you do need to listen to consumers.
I think there's a little bit of that you need though, that thinking of like if you don't get it, that's on you, right? Because I had that mentality, like because I knew my product was good, but there were some people who were just unwilling to try it or they were skeptical, and I thought, you know what, that's okay, you'll come around eventually. But definitely balancing that with what you're hearing, and so I think ultimately like the most important thing is like continuing to believe in what you're doing and not getting hung up on like the negativity or a bad review, right? But again, back to this idea of like looking for patterns, taking things seriously, and knowing what to blow off and when. Yeah.
Yeah. As you've grown now, you mentioned like mentorship wasn't a early part of your commitment and process, but how does that play a role now? Both you serving as a mentor and
Yeah.
also those who have mentored you.
I think when I step in and help as a mentor, like I really let the founder kind of lead. I never try to like change what they're doing. I really just help problem solve along with them and get them thinking about things differently because they're going to have the best answer, right? Like I can help them brainstorm and think about things differently, but I'm never going to tell them what to do because it's ultimately like they're the ones that know the best.
Hmm. Mary Elizabeth asked, is there a quote that you live by?
I had a few. One that I've used for many years is say yes now, then figure out how. And this just goes back to my earliest days of like jumping in and not knowing what the hell I was doing. But saying yes to like everything that came to me because I was excited to do it. This doesn't mean like overextending yourself, right? Like you have to know when to say no if something is just like not in line with your values, or if you just are physically incapable, that's okay. But if it's something that you can do, I would say just don't let fear, tell you to say no.
Hmm. That's great. We have about 5 minutes here, so if you guys have questions, throw them in the chat. Maybe raising the elevation here again, knowing that we've got a couple dozen student groups that are really at the beginning stage, and some are really just testing out the problem, and some are now working on solution and launch. But what are some of those blanket general pieces that you say like, hey, these three things are really going to help you,
Yeah.
get to where you want to go?
I think like keeping an open mind about your business and kind of your overall goals for it are important because things will switch, like you'll flex, you're gonna end up doing things differently than you might think in the very beginning. So just a very open mind to like what your roadmap could look like, I think is so key. Definitely leaving room for failure because it will happen, every day something will go wrong. But just seeing everything as a learning experience, you have to like ditch the ego really to embrace that. I think as founders, we try to, position ourselves as all knowing sometimes, and because we want to seem like we're in charge and, we like can be trusted. And, but just admitting what you don't know is so key because you're going to find people to help in the right places. And you're going to also like with this level of vulnerability, you're going to just come across as an authentic business person. You're going to have people who are more understanding if something goes wrong. Right. And on that note, just being very transparent with your customers. If, for example, there's a major setback, not trying to hide behind it, but just being blunt and saying, hey, like this went wrong. Like we appreciate your patience and here's how we can reward you for, being loyal to us. And I think the overall message through all of that is just like an element of vulnerability.
Yeah. Um, so obviously the last 2.5 years here have been a bit of a wild west for all of us in both beneficial and very challenging ways.
Yeah.
I mean, without knowing your exact role now in the brand, how has supply chain, stay at home, like all of these new challenges that founders need to really be thinking about to tackle affected kind of your work and any learning lessons there?
Yeah, there's like deodorant specifically is not something that people were like excited to use during the pandemic or weren't using as frequently, right? Because we're stuck at home and didn't need it. So just finding ways to keep the customer engaged and excited by your brand through this. Maybe that means limited edition scents, or maybe that's going a bit off of your traditional offering and offering something that's new, like a lotion or whatever it might be, just to keep people going. I think partnering with other brands when there's opportunity there makes sense. It shows that you're, thinking creatively. Maybe you're tapping into their audience, they're tapping into yours, and just always finding ways to collaborate and think about things in an innovative way. And then there's also this downtime, right? Like trying to use that to your advantage. Like, okay, maybe things are slower right now. Like, how can we take advantage of that and just like really map out our future and make, some strategic decisions.
Mm, great. We have a question here, which is, how would you describe your leadership style? And if I can expand on that a little bit, tell us about you as kind of from a management perspective, and both the heavy hand versus the delicate touch, and the
Yeah.
needing to meet goals and revenue objectives, and also like really hold the personal element of
Yeah.
managing a team and
I
staffing.
consider myself more of a collaborative leader, but there's definitely times where you have to step in and like really show that you're in charge, right? And just like people, not just because you need things to get done, but also because your team needs that from you, right? Like not every teammate is equipped to make all the decisions themselves. They want someone telling them what to do, letting them know that they're on track, letting them know where they screwed up. And I think it's hard. Like being an entrepreneur in general has all these challenges, but then like sometimes we have to adjust our personalities as leaders too and learn it. And what's extra tricky is when you have somebody who's grown with you along the way. So like my first employee, when he started, he was working in my garage, right? And we're buddies. But then as the company got bigger, like I had different expectations of him and my leadership style changed a little bit. And so he had to adjust to that. And it's an awkward thing. It's not easy. But I think just being, doing the best you can and encouraging feedback from your team, of course you're giving them feedback, but ask them too, like, what am I doing wrong? Or what can I do differently that would make you feel more secure in your position?
Mhm. I have a question here, which is, are there any books that you would recommend? Kind of, again, we touched a little bit on some resources that might be available to founders.
Yeah, I have to plug my book.
Yeah.
I do, but besides that, there's a one, oh my God, the name is escaping me. Shoot, it's a CPG book. There's a curve on the cover. It's blue. I'll think of it. I'll send it to you, but then you can share it with your
Yeah.
team or with your students.
Yeah.
But I think also just business publications like Inc. magazine and Entrepreneur magazine and Fast Company just are nice ways to get quick stories that can be inspiring or that you can learn from. And I generally am more of a magazine reader or articles online than I am like a book person.
Yep. Yep. Kind of like wrap this all up now, the acquisition is taking place. What are you working on now? You started an investment fund called
Mhm.
Color. What's keeping you very excited?
Yeah.
Tell us about the Web 3.0 space, the NFT space.
Yeah, all of it really, as an investor, there's always new opportunities and it's a great way to stay relevant and know, what's trending. Natural Products Expo you mentioned, that's coming up next month. So I'm excited to go there. And yeah, the Web3 space is super intriguing to me. I think it's, there's a lot of skepticism around it for good reason, but there's also some really exciting opportunity there for brands that I'm trying to help people understand. And yeah, we'll see what's next. I always try to stay at the forefront of what's trending, but also have a healthy dose of skepticism just to make sure that I'm, protecting myself and making smart decisions.
Yeah. All right. Well, this has really been tremendously helpful, seeing a successful and passionate entrepreneur, and learning from your path a little bit, and handing off some resources. We're super fortunate to have you. Very, very lucky. And again, want to thank you on behalf of everybody at SDSU for your time. Wondering if there's any kind of parting wisdom or words that you think, like, if you learn nothing,
Yeah.
think about this.
I thought of another book I want to recommend real quick. That's sitting right next to me. This is it's called The Minimalist Entrepreneur by Sahil, and he is an amazing writer. And it's just this idea of like building a business from like little. And when I say little, it's not just capital, but it's more of like a minimalist sort of thinking style. So definitely check that one out. I wanted to leave you with some book. But parting words of wisdom. I think just having like an open mind as you're growing, not just like, professionally or in your career, but just like on a personal level too. Like you're going to change your mind and that's okay. I've talked to a lot of entrepreneurs who are really like stressed out because they think, they jumped into something, they feel like they gotten too far and they're like afraid to back out when they realize it's not working or that they don't love it. I encourage people to just to accept that that's going to happen and just, before it's too late, if you change your mind, that's okay. And it's just, we learn something from every experience. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Amazing. Jamie, if you're ever in Southern California, we'd love to host you at SDSU.
I live
On
down here,
campus.
so
Oh, you
yeah,
do? Where are you now?
I'm in San Diego.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah, I moved down
There
here
you
a
go.
year ago from Portland, so yeah,
Okay.
there
I,
could be
I didn't
a
get the memo.
chance to come in. Yeah.
Fantastic. Are
Jamie,
there
I
any
wanted to
local,
let
Oh,
you
are
know
there
that
sweet.
I
any
use
local
your product.
suggestions? Oh, go ahead.
Yay. Oh, good choice. I like that scent.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Are,
Thank you.
are, are there any local either meetups, TCA suggestions that you would have, kind of knowing that you're in this region as well?
I'm still very new here, but the Naturally San Diego group is really interesting. If you're into like the natural product space, that's a cool one to know. But there's probably a lot more that I would love to learn about too. And I went, let's see, like over the summer, just all the different like street fairs and kind of maker festivals. That was really fun for me to go and just sort of relive my early days in the business.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And then if folks want to engage, obviously being mindful of your time and various numerous commitments, is Twitter, or how do you connect with folks?
Yeah, that's a great way. Like Twitter DMs or Instagram. It's perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah, my handle's just here. I'll drop it. It's Jaime Schmidt, but Jamie spelled a little differently than some might assume.
Fantastic. Jamie, thank you so much. It's really been such a pleasure. Again, super inspired by the work you're doing. Hope that you gain a little bit of inspiration yourself from kind of seeing the fresh faces again that are on their little kind of path their own. So thank you. And hopefully we can reconnect soon.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. Thanks, everyone.
Have an excellent day.
Bye.